Let's get started. Bismillah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه أستعين وأصلي وأسلم على خاتم النبيين محمد صلى الله عليه وعلى آله الطاهرين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.
عليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
اللهم إنا نسألك علما نافعا وقلبا خاشعا وعينا دامعا وبدنا على البلاء صابرا ونعوذ بك اللهم من علم لا ينفع.
I ask Allah Azza wa Jalla to grant us the good that is with Him. I ask Allah to protect us from an eye that doesn't hear and a heart that isn't humbled. O teacher of Dawood, teach us. O you who granted Sulaiman understanding, grant us understanding.
As the mashayikh are coming in, and we ask the mashayikh to come in, inshallah. Our dear mashayikh, mashallah, sometimes the mashayikh like their communities to listen to them, but they don't like listening. You know, that's how we are. May Allah guide us all. Sorry, we have a few technical difficulties. As we're fixing them, inshallah, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned Surah Al-Baqarah, وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً, when He spoke about His ambassadors, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among those ambassadors. The angels responded to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, asking Him about the purpose of this creation. أَتَجْعَلُ فِيهَا مَنْ يُفْسِدُ فِيهَا وَيَسْفِكُ الدِّمَاءِ. The angels were known for their worship. And Adam alayhi salatu wassalam was known for his ilm. وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, after a few verses, says, وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي وَإِذْ قُلْنَا لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ اسْجُدُوا لِآدَمَ فَسَجَدُوا إِلَّا إِبْلِيسَ قال أهل العلم والحكمة من ذلك أن يعرف الناس فضل العالم على العابد. One of the greatest lessons that we learn is that people understand the value of our scholars over the ubbad, over the sincere worshippers. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among those who continue to seek this ilm. So inshallah, we're going to begin with our right side for the Q&A session, from right and then left. We ask our mashayikh to limit their questions to less than 3 minutes, inshallah. The mashayikh already know the question that you're proposing or you're asking, so it doesn't need much details. You can ask the mashayikh, and hopefully, inshallah, you and I will receive a clear answer from our panelists and from our dear ulama. Jazakumullah khair. We're going to begin with the right side. Tfaddal, Shaykhana. Inshallah, before you begin, if you can introduce yourself and the institution that you represent, so we may get to know one another, inshallah.
Bismillah. My name is Omar. I represent myself.
MashaAllah.
I'm just a layman, inshallah. My question is about the training of future muftis, inshallah. We mentioned that there's a bit of a deficiency in the current academic institutions, specifically in the area of fiqh and preparing muftis. So, are there any projects in the work or any future plans to offer graduate level studies specifically for the training and the development of the future muftis of America, inshallah?
Are you directing your question to any sheikh specifically?
Not necessarily.
Allah barakallahu fik for your question. I don't know what's the delay in the response. Because mashallah, we have two people who are very active in the educational setting in the United States of, inshallah, educating Muslims in their deen to the level, inshallah, hopefully, of scholars and such, both working in different venues, but inshallah with the same goal, and both of them having graduate also. Sheikh Hatem, you have graduate. So so both of them have graduate. So I would like each of them to give us a minute or two as their programs, what is already available, so that we can build upon them in the future. See, this is what happens when you ask me to speak. Eventually, it'll come back to you. Oh, is that right? Okay, so they're not supposed to promote their organization, so let me promote them on their behalf. So alhamdulillah, we have, can I speak then? So I'm speaking in general. Alhamdulillah, we have things in the United States. We have like Mishkat University, the Islamic University of Minnesota. I don't know who's involved, but is that the right name? Which has an English branch to it, also Zidni Institute. So alhamdulillah, these organizations and others like them, they've been around for a while now, alhamdulillah. So they are, they're getting the experience, and hopefully, inshallah, they're building on that experience, and they are, inshallah, producing people who are qualified, or at least on the steps, inshallah, of being future leaders for us, inshallah, in the United States.
If I can add, yani, I was more talking specifically with regards to fiqh. Yani, alhamdulillah, for some reason, I find avenues, for specialized studies, for example, in qira'at, in Quran, even in hadith, yani isnad and the like. For some reason, I find that the area of fiqh is lacking specifically for advanced studies and preparation of true muftis. Yani. With regards to some of these academic institutions, alhamdulillah, they provide a good broad, bird-eyes view of Islam, and it's great, but I find that it is lacking in preparing true muftis for the future.
Barakallahu feek. So obviously your suggestion, alhamdulillah, or your concern is a very important one. And alhamdulillah, others share it with you. And I think the steps are there. Let me just consult Sophia. All right, so alhamdulillah, they are, there's in the works somewhere where they are improving, inshallah, their area of fiqh to develop also muftis, inshallah. So it is there, inshallah, and hopefully it will continue to improve, inshallah.
And we can always promote AMJA here, certainly.
No, I'm not going to do that.
When someone graduates and finishes their degree and finishes a master's degree, can join the AMJA Muftiin online, the Mufti online, and the Muftiin online by AMJA. They do have access to the resident fatwa committee of the senior AMJA scholars. So it takes durba, it takes practice and training and mentorship, and that is what they get when they are basically involved in this program.
Jazakumullah khair.
So if I may continue. So it's an open session, right? We can. So there is, I think, an important idea for AMJA, and this idea has been put out there. So maybe if the masses kind of insist on it more, maybe it'll be taken a little bit more seriously. And that is for AMJA, since it is this body, it's supposed to be this body representing this kind of subject matter. If AMJA could produce a scientific journal quarterly or twice a year, that will encourage, inshallah, others to write for it and have that connection with AMJA. And of course, it'll be a refereed journal, inshallah. But also one of the benefits of this journal also would be to highlight those who are out there who have an understanding, a good understanding. Maybe they can also get the support, inshallah, as well. This is something that I think has been needed for a long time. I don't think there's anything out there in English. If somebody wants to publish in English, they're going to have to either go to, let's say, like a secular journal, or there's some journals out there, but their approach is very different. Their mindset is very different, and so therefore their refereeing is very different than what we would hope to have from AMJA, inshallah. So you might, drop a line to people involved in AMJA that you like this idea.
Jazakumullah khair.
Shall I give you names, phone numbers, and?
تفضل شيخنا. If you could state your name in the masjid.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
السلام.
أخوكم في الله عبد المجيد إمام المركز الإسلامي بباطن رجل بيزيانا. I have 3 quick questions, inshallah. Number 1, One day we invited a very well respected scholar, and I asked him this question. I told him, is it permissible to buy full coverage, auto insurance, comprehensive? And he said, well, if you are rich, just buy liability. It's not permissible for you to buy full coverage. If you are poor or you have limited funds and budget, whatever, you don't have much money, so you are allowed to buy a full coverage, auto insurance. So as Imam, is it appropriate and proper for me to call this a balanced fatwa? Is it a balanced fatwa? And is it proper to advocate for it and promote it? Or is it we are just weakening people's relationship with Allah? And this is from the negative views of the concept of ease. الترخص السلبي في الفتوى. Second question, inshallah, very, very quick. هل يؤثم الإمام, and this is very common, by the way, that's common, I think all of us has experienced that. هل يؤثم الإمام, I continue in English or in Arabic, شيوخ? English?
كله خير. إن شاء الله تصل.
Maybe if, inshallah, okay. Is it a sin for the Imam? Is he sinning if he refuses to conduct the Islamic act of marriage because he requires first for the couple to go to the court or the whatever, the city hall, to bring the civil marriage? You know, to protect the masjid, to protect the imam, to protect both parties, inshallah, from deceiving each other. So is it a sin by asking them go first to the court and then come back to us, inshallah? And the third one, inshallah, when the wife has so much hardship with her husband and the husband refuses to divorce her, is she allowed to request khula from the American court? Is it, inshallah, هل هذا محترف به في الشريعة الإسلامية إن شاء الله? This is very important because that happened to us many times. I think most imams went through this experience, inshallah. جزاكم الله خير. بارك الله.
So with respect to, we decided I'll take one and then pass it on, inshallah. I said we decided I'll take one and then pass it on, inshallah. So with respect to the first one, so that fatwa that you got, obviously the point behind it is, you know, if the insurance, if you're resorting to insurance as a kind of necessity, then you should restrict your necessity to, you know, the minimum of what is required. So in most states that I'm familiar with, you don't actually have to get auto insurance if you can put up a bond, and that bond is different amounts in different states. And basically, the whole idea of insurance is that there needs to be some money in there in case you get into an accident. So that bond will be put into a trust, or that money will be put essentially into a trust. If you get in an accident, you'll have to pay the other party you'll be forced by law to pay the other party by that law. So if someone is rich and has the means, you know, this might be, and he really wants to avoid insurance completely, this is obviously a good option for him, inshallah, if possible. Otherwise, the question of, for example, if a poor person gets into an accident, and since he's poor, and if he doesn't have full coverage, let's say like it's his fault, and he doesn't have full coverage, then, you know, let's say like the car is worth $10,000, that means he's going to be out this $10,000, and he may not have the means to get a new car now. And so someone like that, you'd probably have to look to see what is his situation exactly, Obviously, again, the default is you don't get insurance and you get the minimum required by law. But you could maybe imagine a situation where, I mean, hypothetically, I'm not saying that this would be my fatwa, but hypothetically, you can imagine a situation where if this person doesn't have a car, if he's living in an area where he doesn't have a car, if that car is removed from him and he doesn't have the means then to get a new car, that he will be put in a very difficult situation. There may not be a Muslim community there to support him and help him. So now his level of what is a necessity for him may be different than what is a necessity for somebody else. Wallahu alam.
الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. بخصوص السؤال الثاني
With regard to the second question,
هل يأثم الإمام
is the imam sinful for sending a couple away and refusing to marry them until they have a marriage license from the county clerk?
عن يعني زواجا شرعيا حتى
To refuse to marry them Islamically until they are legally married or legally licensed to marry.
بعد ذلك يعقد لهم الزواج الإسلامي. في الحقيقة يعني
In reality,
يعني أو يمكن بعبارة أخرى أن يحضروا رخصة الزواج يعني المدني أولا.
we can say that they just need to get the marriage license first and then he can marry them the Islamic marriage. There is no sin on this, inshallah. Rather, this should be encouraged. All the imams should follow this so that people do not endure the backlash of marrying people without there being a marriage license, as the laws, local laws stipulate. So it's a simple process to get the marriage license and then marry them off. To preserve their rights and also to preserve the masjid. Many of those who get married without informing the governments. This could usually, if it's not an easy process, it could be because his parents are already married. And there could be some sort of circumventing the taxes involved or hiding the first wife involved. And then whenever the first dispute happens, they say this person is married, and they quote that he's cheating on me, and then they say, no, the imam married us, and the imam gets in trouble because it gets traced back to him. And so you can tell them that Islamically, you don't even require the imam of the masjid to get married Islamically. But if you want the imam of the masjid to marry you, you're going to need to have a marriage license. And so that will be on your responsibility, not mine. And so you're not really sinful because you're not really preventing them from marriage. You're just abstaining from conducting the marriage yourself. If you want the imam to bear the burden of marrying you, then you're going to have to bring the imam a marriage license. This is the logic behind this, is what Allah Azza wa Jal said, that let no witness and no documenter should be harmed, right? As Allah says in the Quran about debts. And so likewise in marriages, a person, he wants the imam to oversee the marriage and document the marriage in the masjid and whatnot, then he should not be subject to harm because he's doing that. Because it could, endanger the imam. Same thing should be said about divorce. A woman should be divorced Islamically first, and then you write to them an Islamic paper, that's fine.
بقي سؤال ثالث صح؟
Alhamdulillah. Can she seek khula from the regular court? I don't know if they have khula in the regular court, but can she seek termination of marriage or whatever this would be called in a regular court? If the husband is if the husband refuses to come to the masjid for arbitration, or to seek the hakamain, the two arbitrators, or to resolve the conflict in a way that is Islamic, and he's just being stubborn and rebellious, she can take him to court. What can she do? If the husband accepts to come to the masjid for arbitration, to a hakam or to the hakamain, then she should not take him to court before she goes through the process of arbitration. And then, certainly there will be decisions made, and if he also refuses to obey the sort of the decisions of the arbitrators, she could also take him to court. And at the end of the day, we as Muslims, that is what we are prescribing for the Muslims. We cannot prevent anyone from going to court at any time they want. We are telling them that from an Islamic perspective, you are to seek first arbitration, Islamic arbitration, so that the conflict can be resolved according to Islamic terms, and if he refused, take him to court. Then she's not listening to us in the first place. Then she can do whatever she wants. Because if she's not going to listen to us, we don't have any executive power in this country, and we have to understand this.
Not from the crowd. Barakallah feekum ya mashayikh. Sisters, any questions? تفضل شيخ.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. محمد فؤاد Islamic Society Denton. أولا الأمل معقود.
Hope is had in AMJA here in the United States of America.
Americanize Islam. AMJA أكاديمية وتجمع نخبة من الفقهاء والعلماء الموثوق بهم. بناء على هذا انتهز الفرصة.
AMJA is high caliber personality people, and so there's great hope, and they can prevent the reduction of Islam too. So I just wish to say a few things, and perhaps some of the presenters, the way they frame certain things, people can think that there's no such thing as ijtihad anymore, and based on that there's no authority in people's opinions. We have that the layman, he's incapable of researching, and so if he asks a scholar, then this is an evidence that he must act upon. Person asks a scholar and told him it's haram, he has no right. This is your opinion, not mine. This is haram until he finds another scholar who can tell him that it's not actually haram. I just wish people would keep that in mind. Also, I wish people would reconsider the word ijtihad mutlaq is closed, because this will rewind us to some very dangerous place, that fiqh has become obsolete at Malik and Shafi'i and Ahmad. And these are words that I think we can all agree should be taken with a grain of salt, should be reconsidered. No doubt we're not Malik and Shafi'i and Ahmad, and the days have changed, the people have changed, their caliber has changed. But to say there is no ijtihad to be done anymore, this cannot be correct. Also, the issue of the weak hadith. I wish that all the brothers, and teachers, my colleagues, my teachers, that we are careful when we speak about weak hadith, because some people, they confuse the weak hadith is like the forged hadith. They think they're all in one basket. This is this confusion, something new. The earlier scholars never confused the two. There's authentic hadith and weak hadith, belied hadith, or hadith that are lies, forged, fabricated. With the weak hadith, there are 4 different types of weak hadith.
شيخنا الله يبارك فيك. خلاص السؤال وصل، أنت بتتكلم مع علماء، إن شاء الله الرسالة وصلت.
بارك الله فيك. بس
هل
نحب
الأسئلة
نضع
موجهة
هذا
لشخص
التحذير.
الأسئلة موجهة لشخص بعينه ولا أي واحد؟
لا لا لا، جميعا.
ولا
بارك
هذا
الله.
أسئلة ولا بس
هو تحذير، الله يكرمك.
نصائح؟
تحذير. بارك الله فيك.
بارك الله فيك، جزاكم الله خير.
Time just had to run out and they had to excuse himself for interrupting the sheikh.
يبدو أنها كانت ملاحظات، فإن شاء الله مع مشايخ. Do you have anything؟
أنا ما عنديش مشكلة مع كلامه صح.
تفضل تفضل.
شكرا. هذا كلام صحيح، لكن
The words he mentioned are correct. And alhamdulillah, collective ijtihad that exists in numerous associations,
المؤسسات الجامعة الفقهية
that's all we're really saying.
وتنظر في المستجدات
They look at the newly emerging events
وفتاوى
and they produce fatwa for these pertinent issues.
من وجود فتاوى في المستجدات على
There's not a year that passes except that these fiqh assemblies release decisions on these sensitive issues that newly emerge.
الأدوية. المهم الاجتهاد لم يغلق بالتأكيد.
We totally agree that the door of ijtihad has not been shut. With regards to weak ahadith,
التوصية التي انتهيت إليها
I wish to continue what I had mentioned in my bahth, in my research, and read it to you regarding weak ahadith, just so there is no discrepancy.
رأيي بعدم جواز العمل بال
There are some scholars say you cannot use a weak hadith,
لكن ما انتهيت إليه
but what I concluded that you can act upon a weak hadith
عند اتصال العمل به في سائر الأمصار
so long as it's been practiced through generations
غير إنكار.
without the denunciation, meaning it's been accepted in practice.
والثابتة الأخرى
Uh,
أن يكون
and so long as it's not severely weak or not in opposition to authentic texts of the Sharia. This is with regards to
الأحكام
the rulings. As with regards to actions of virtue, that is permissible to use weak hadith so long as it is not intensely weak, meaning borderline or in actuality a fabricated hadith. And so long as a person does not believe that acting upon them, that this will grant us the reward of the sunnah. This is just, I guess, a middle view that I've had, or that I concluded that many scholars have had, and I've leaned to and adopted.
إضافة صغيرة بخصوص مسألة الاجتهاد المطلق.
I just wishes to add something about absolute ijtihad. When the scholars mention mujtahid mutlaq and absolute mujtahid,
هو الذي
this is a person
الأصول والقواعد
that places the principles and the fundamentals that those before him had placed
فقهاء الصحابة.
and then applies them.
فهؤلاء يعني هم الذين وضعوا لنا الأصول التي بناء عليها صار المجتهدون بعد ذلك يستعملون هذه الآليات في فهم النصوص. ف يعني مسألة عدم إمكانية وجود مجتهد مطلق هي من باب أن الأصول محصورة، يعني لا يتصور.
Though some scholars also, when they say there's no absolute ijtihad anymore, this can also have been said from the vantage point that there are certain things that are beyond being discussed. They're over and done with. And so he will not be performing ijtihad on every last issue. He'll only be performing ijtihad in certain specific realms.
الصحابي إلى آخره مثلا، فليس هناك مجال لإحداث يعني دليل جديد.
And so there's no room to find new sources of Islamic law or new angles to deal with the texts in terms of interpretation. And so what kind of evidences can be used and how they can be used, they're going to be following the footsteps of the mujtahideen before them. They're not their own types of mujtahideen. Their own, I guess, independent mujtahideen. And so the concept of ijtihad, al-mujtahid al-muqayyad, meaning like a limited mujtahid, a mujtahid that can perform ijtihad within a limited sphere, that certainly will exist until the last day, until the day of judgment. But to say that everything can be revisited and reinvented and new ijtihad, that's what the scholars were saying is closed, and that's what cannot be absolute ijtihad.
يعني
I wish to say,
لأنه عرض بحث أو بحثين أو ثلاثة بحوث في نصف ساعة أمر شاق جدا.
and also we wish to excuse some of the presenters. I wish the brothers will read the papers, because they will find the clarification there. But reading 1 or 2 or 3 research papers that the presenter does in a half hour or presenting them, something extremely difficult. So I hope just people will put that in their considerations. Many of these elaborations or qualifying statements that are being made now are already actually there in the papers. And so what you mentioned is totally correct, and we agree with it. As for the details, we may disagree on some smaller details of it, but we agree in principle, and you will find that agreement actually in the papers themselves.
My question is primarily for Sheikh Hatim and Sheikh Jamal about the notion of time. So for example, when you say that the majority of the scholars for, 1,000 years or for whatever number of years have said this, so it's unlikely that they're wrong because they keep on saying it every generation. But that notion of time is different depending on the time you're in. So 500 years ago, the first several centuries of Islam, that was a lot of time. Now we are 1,400 years later. The first few hundred years is not that much compared to when we added up to like 1,000 years or more than that. And in 1,000 years from now, time will be about 2,400 years of Islam. So when you say the majority say something for all these years, hence it's probably right. But in 1,000 years from now, a certain trend can take place for a certain question where the answer is different. So why do we have to keep sticking to the time notion when that time keeps changing and it's not, not constant?
طيب بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Interesting question. First of all, the question of the majority of the scholars holding a certain opinion, the majority in itself is not a hujjah. If you're talking about ijma', that's something else. If an ijma' took place, then that ijma' is something definitive, right? لا تجتمع أمتي على الضلال. So if the ijma' took place, then it's defining something that is correct. Now, at the same time, an ijma' could take place under certain circumstances where the circumstances change, and as a result, it may look like a contradiction of the ijma', but actually they're talking about a different circumstance. So, for example, in my lecture and in my paper, I talked about the question of what they call following or تتبع rukhus, following the rukhus. Yes, thank you. The exemption, or actually the easiest opinion, right? Looking for the easiest opinion. So you can find many scholars from up until a certain point in time, like the 7th and 8th century of the Hijrah, saying that there is ijma' on this point, that this is not allowed. Just looking for the easiest opinion, this is not allowed. And then all of a sudden, a few scholars appear who say actually it is permissible. So it looks like there was ijma'. How could these new scholars say that basically contravened the ijma'? But really they were talking, they didn't express it even in this way, but really they were talking about now their circumstances were different from the previous circumstances. In the previous circumstances, as I said, where the mufti is free to make ijtihad, or scholars were free to make ijtihad, you didn't have this restriction on them. So it's not a case of following rukhas, it's a case of this is what my ijtihad leads me to, and this is my conclusion. When, as they say, the door to ijtihad was closed, where now all you have is the different madhabs, and you have to choose from those madhabs, now all of a sudden, given this new reality, a new opinion appears. So for example, if you look at the Qudha in Egypt from about the 8th century onward, there are certain opinions in the Hanafi school which they considered too difficult for the people. Now, my point, as I alluded to in the lecture, if it is, yes, it's too difficult, then this in itself is not really a strong argument. But if it is difficult and the evidence doesn't really support it, it is just a madhab opinion, then you can follow another opinion. But because of the strict madhab views, so there were certain issues. It was well known that in the times of the Mamluk in Egypt, it was well known that if you had this problem, X problem, the dominant madhab and the government madhab is the Hanafi madhab. So the default, you go to a Hanafi qadi. But if the problem was concerning this, where the Hanafi madhab was too difficult for the people, by definition they would send you to, for example, a Maliki qadi. Or if the question was this, they would send you by definition to a Shafi'i scholar. And this was a response now to a new situation. So the new situations and the change in the circumstances may lead to new opinions that look from one perspective, it may look like they're violating the ijma', but in reality, because the circumstances have changed, you need a new ruling. So always, now you're talking about 1,400 years, now you add another 1,000 years. Those opinions or the circumstances can change a lot. So they might have very different circumstances leading to different conclusions. But again, if you are talking just about the majority opinion, again, the majority opinion, that in itself is not a hujjah. Right? So some people, as I said, they define shadh as that opinion which goes against the majority opinion. Well, the majority is not always correct. Scholars, for example, Ibn Taymiyyah and others have held and argued, and I can say, you can maybe argue, shown, that the majority isn't necessarily correct. So the jamhur is not a hujjah in and of itself. So it could be the case that the jamhur was holding an opinion, and that maybe the jamhur switches at a certain point when people have more. That's the nicest way I've ever seen it. Please end. Okay.
Just to specify, now Sheikh Hatem has to answer too. I was talking about Jamhur. I understand that it's not a hujjah. I'm just saying the comfort value that time gives you, why should that even be a notion or a factor in this case when time is not
okay,
like
so
that?
I don't know what he'll say, but from my point of view, it's not necessarily a comfort factor.
No, but I just wanted to say also that there are two issues that are important to basically understand when it comes to time. One of the issues, because time was mentioned in a different context before, that the fatwas change with time and rulings change with time. I just want you to reduce all of those factors, time, place, conditions, and so on, and think of one thing only, which is the manatat. Basically the effective causes of the rulings, and whether the ruling hinges on an effective cause that is comprehensible or not. It could change by, in different times, places, conditions, whatever. All of those things are vehicles for the change or the lack thereof, the change of manatat or lack thereof. When it comes to time from the aspect that I think you're talking about, that is why we have something called al-mutaqaddimin wal-mutaakhirin. That is why we have, you're talking about 2,400 years from now, the majority may be completely different. But we will always be able to say that the majority of the Salaf, the righteous predecessors, were upheld that position because that is not going to change 2,400 years from now. So that is another basically measure to use the concept, the majority concept, regardless of time, which is to discern between the majority of the mutaqaddimin, the majority of the Salaf, and then anyone who comes afterwards. Does that to some extent answer the question?
To some extent, but as a mufti and faqih for you, it gives you a comfort that,
But
oh,
the
most of this.
Sheikh Jamal told you that the word majority itself does not indicate that this is the right position. It is for isti'nas, which you said comfort, and actually isti'nas is comfort. So you're right. It does give you some comfort. But 2,400 years from now, if you will still be able to say that the majority of the earlier, the Salaf, the righteous predecessors, or the earlier scholars upheld that position, and that should give you more comfort than to say that their majority said something and our majority, our contemporary majority, says something else, which should raise a red flag. It does not mean that the majority of the earlier ones is necessarily right, but it would raise a red flag and would induce you to investigate the matter further.
Is this the yellow card after this?
This is the, no, I was going to ask him for a red card, but subhanAllah.
If you were going to get a red card from Sadr.
Inshallah. Jazakumullah khair.
Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa mawlah.
This is the last question, by the way, for the tafadhal.
Your brother Amr As-Samni with Mercy for Mankind Global Dawah. Just subhanallah, our experience in the dawah field was actually on many different levels. One of civic involvement. We got involved with at least couple dozen local civic organizations, and subhanallah, that involvement was extremely successful because for the first time, these non-Muslims started seeing Muslims getting involved, helping poor families, sponsoring children to go to school, and so on and so forth. So alhamdulillah, that was pretty significant success that I just wanted to share with the imams. But at the same time, I wanted to ask our scholars here about some of the challenges that we do face, because once you get involved in the civic life, a lot of these civic organizations are very liberal and they are extremely supportive of the Muslim community, but at the same time, they are also supportive of every minority, including gay rights, including liberal issues like legalizing marijuana, for example, and things like that. So my question to you today is, when it comes to having allies from these liberal organizations, what if they put you in a place where you would actually have to support, meanwhile, things like legalizing marijuana or things like gay rights, and ask you to be part of these kind of alignments? What would you do? Of course, we Muslims know the halal and the haram, but then we look at the bigger picture. The conservatives, they will never support you as a minority. The only support you get from the American society was primarily from these liberals. So what would you do as as community leader at this stage? Thank you. Barakallahu feekum.
Praise be to Allah, and may His final peace and blessings be upon the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Of course, this can never be answered in a minute or two, but the general rule is to try to strike a balance between the pros and the cons. People that participate in evils, these are evils in our religion, but they are not those that abide by that system of rules. And so taking part with them in certain efforts that secure a benefit for the Muslims. So just the big picture here is just a balance between the pros and the cons. Of course, if they ask of you to endorse them in these haram things, then of course we're not going to endorse them in that regard.
ربما تكون نافعة. دائما أحيانا الإنسان يضع نفسه بين اختيارين، يؤيد الجمهوريين ويؤيد.
We have an experience in Minnesota. Perhaps I can share it with you. Sometimes he puts himself between two choices, being with the Republicans or the Democrats. And so if he, allies with Republicans, that means pro-wars against many of the Muslim lands, and the Democratic Party endorses many liberal ideas that are not consistent with our value system. But there are other there are third parties. And we have, for example, an organization that pulls together many different community organizations and churches and the likes. Majority of them could be almost a quarter of the non-enemies. They don't go to candidates. Candidates come to them because they've developed that degree of traction. And so they have certain, for example, demands of them, that they're against the wars and they're against same-sex marriages. They are against them. So the demands are more about supporting the poor and the needy and criminalizing abortion. And so abortion also is something that's prohibited in our tradition. For the most part, many scholars have prohibited it after 40 days, some a little later. But the point being is that in general it's prohibited. Just with a slight disagreement on at one point does it become prohibited. And so the Muslims joined them in this regard, and their political interests were added to the list of demands, if you will, of this coalition. And so the point is participating in political civic engagement in general, not limiting ourselves unnecessarily, is important. Muslims should think for these political coalitions that is closest to our way in terms of the conservatism and noble. And so, and there could be a great alternative to us than feeling the need to compromise our values.
And many resources to teach us how to navigate through them. For us, for an example, in Michigan, we were able to collaborate with the evangelicals. هم أشد تشددا من المسلمين في كثير من القضايا. أهل النص يعتبرون. فالevangelicals, the Catholics, so they were the representation, and we were able to change a lot. So there's people out there that we can reach out, including myself, that we've learned a lot from. جزاكم الله خير مشايخنا. May Allah reward you all, and for our esteemed mashayikh and ulama. Inshallah, we will go on for Salat al-Maghrib and Isha, inshallah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك اللهم ونتوب إليك. السلام عليكم.